Phyllis, how are you? Hello. Hope you had a good week and you're feeling good and you're learning Torah on your own, getting your chumash blown up. Good, I'm glad you had a good week. We should see each other soon. We'll talk about that. And we'll just wait a minute or two to start. I was just sitting outside by a fire, beautiful, getting the last warm days in. Yeah, you're reading a lot? Great. Oh, you're reading my book. How do you like it? I hope you like it. I have many, many more for you. I have like 50 storybooks. So, hi, Jill. Oh, thank you. Thank you. It was such an honor to speak at that event. And another Jill, 2 Jills in a row. Wow, that's amazing. And we're so happy you have your kosher mezuzah up. And I wanted to come to Palm Springs this week, and I actually thought about it, and I'd visit you, but it's going to rain, so I'm not coming. Oh, Sarah Lydia from Jerusalem. Ir HaKodesh, the holy city. I always feel so connected when, yeah, we're all going to Israel, Phyllis, don't worry. But when I see Sarah Lydia's name pop up, and I know that it's 6 a.m. in Jerusalem, I feel well protected, well taken care of. So, l'chaim, everybody, to a beautiful week ahead. That we should really have the success in Israel and with Mashiach coming. And Phyllis, we're going to go. Don't worry. So I have 3 grandchildren that are living in Sfat for the year. Hi, Stephanie. So I'm really eager to get to Sfat. And then I have one grandson who, a different grandson who just became a paratrooper last week. I think I've already bragged about him last week. And he's going to be stationed for 4 months in Hebron. And I'm sure anybody who knows me knows how deeply connected I am to Hebron and how much I love Hebron. And yeah, I want to dedicate this week to Shlomo Carlebach, Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach. It was his yahrzeit, and I really had the honor of participating in one of the many teachings and sharings of a beautiful time in our life, a time of inspiration and a time really of uplifting and inspiring. You know, I know that like now, like when I sit to pray in a service, you know, like I have like a 2-hour limit, but in those days it could be hours, you know, the singing and the heart opening and those inspirations really just lifted me. And that's the type of connection we're all striving to get back to feel that depth of connection and that real ability. So I'm going to start. I want to dedicate the class to everybody. I want to dedicate the class to people who are struggling in these days that are continuing. I spoke with some friends today in Jerusalem, and being isolated and having no one that they're living with and hardly seeing people is getting harder and harder for people. And so I want to give a blessing to all our families that are in Israel, first of all, that they should be safe, and that we should be safe here in America and everywhere in the world, that people should really find that place of unity in their heart. And I just want to open by saying that I watched this week, and I'm sure I'm saying it wrong, which is really embarrassing because I should have found out how to say it correctly, but the African country of Malawi. I know it sounds like, I think that's a Jewish food, Malawi, but the African country that is moving their embassy to Jerusalem. And the one thing I noted was the ambassador, that his first name is Eisenhower. And I thought, wow, I'm sure that has a story to it. That's fascinating. So really, it should be all countries are coming in to make peace with Israel, and we should see it in our lifetime. So I want to open up and ask everybody that there is a fundraising drive to raise money for the most Jewish cause there could be, eating. It's Jewish to eat. So there is a wonderful group headed by a wonderful friend in Pico Robertson that brings kosher food to the police men and women that are helping to guard the Jewish neighborhoods during this time of uncertainty. And it's a double-fold mitzvah because it's showing our caring and our support, and it's helping to support kosher restaurants that are really suffering during these times of people not being able to go out. So we've done it in the past. I think there's been like 75 or 100 or more dinners, kosher dinners, that have been provided to the police. Now being on alert, they have 12-hour shifts. That's very, very tough. And just, it's not about the food. Everybody could bring a sandwich from home. It's about the love, and it's about the caring. So for whoever would like to donate, I'm going to give you an address. I'm going to announce it in the middle and at the end. And if you don't get it, you can always email me, olivia@highcenter.org, and I'll send you the right link. But you can send, it'll tell you how to sign up with credit card on Venmo, VENMO, at Baila, BAILA dash ROM, ROMM, 8560. Again, Venmo at Baila dash ROM, 8560, or Olivia at highcenter.org. And if people could contribute in the next day or two, then we'll be able to send a significant number of kosher meals to our really wonderful police that care about us and are out 12-hour shifts working hard to protect our neighborhoods so that we feel safe. And we want to give gratitude to God, gratitude to Hashem for always having taken care of us and to continue to take care of us. So there are so many wonderful things to learn tonight. I mean, there's so many beautiful teachings. So I'm going to start with something about the Haftorah for this week's Parsha. This week's Parsha is the book of Vayeira, and we're going to go into it in many, many details. Oh, and I see my favorite policewoman, Lisa. Hi. I feel totally safe in my class right now. And her daughter is giving of herself in the city of Sderot, Israel. And trust me, it is not an easy place to be. And yet, our kids are in Israel and giving in this selfish, loving way and supporting the country. And that's another level of what we also need to do. So there's the story of Elisha, but before I begin the story, I just want to say that during the 6-Day War, during the time in the 1960s, the Lubavitcher Rebbe came out with these different campaigns. Put on tefillin, light Shabbos candles, have a mezuzah. So you could ask the question, like, all of a sudden you're just going to go up to a person and say, would you, in the middle of the grocery store, would you like to put on tefillin? Or can I give you these Shabbos candles? Please light these candles today. So why wouldn't you ask them to study? Why wouldn't that come first or come learn or something like that? So in the teaching that we're going to be doing today, it's going to answer those questions. And the bottom line question is, does an action bring the emotion, or the emotion bring the action? And we discussed this according to Chassidus in the Haftorah reading this week, which is from the book of Kings. So here's the story. Here's the background. There was a wicked king. This sounds like a fairy tale, but it was a true story. There was a wicked king and a wicked queen, Ahab and Jezebel. I'm sure everybody's heard of Jezebel. And they were the wicked, the worst of the worst, the wickedest of the wickedest. And they oppressed the prophets, and they oppressed Torah sages, and they even had them killed. They were just really not good neighbors. And there was an administrator in the court. His name was Vayeira, and he was a Roman convert, and he actually became a prophet. And there is a book of the prophets called Vayeira, and in it he talked about the destruction that would come to Rome later on. So it says that he was a very wealthy administrator, and he took his own money and he sustained the prophets whose lives were in danger. He took 100 prophets, and he had hid 50 in one cave and 50 in another cave, and he went in secret and he fed them and he took care of them and he made sure to protect them that they would be safe. And he went into, it was very, very expensive in those days money was an issue also, and it was very expensive, and he went to kind of the local loan sharks, and then they were after him, and he never repaid them, and he died. So they threatened his wife. The loan sharks went after his wife, and they told her that they were going to take their 2 children, their 2 sons, unless she paid up the money. And she cried out to the prophet Elisha, who was a prophet at the time. And he said to her, "What do you have in the house? What do you have that you can give?" And she said, "My cupboard is bare. The only thing I have is a small jug of oil, 1 small jug of oil." So Elisha said, "Go to your neighbors, go to anybody you know, and collect jugs and jars and utensils and vessels, as many as you can, and bring them back into your home. And then close the door and stand there and pour from your 1 small jug of oil, pour into every jug, every vessel, every container. Just keep pouring and pouring and pouring." And the oil continued to pour until she didn't have a vessel left to pour it into. And then Elisha told her, "Sell the oil." Olive oil was a very precious commodity. "Pay off your debt, and you will have enough money to live on for the rest of your life." And that basically is the story. So there is a deep discourse that was taught by the Alter Rebbe, the first Lubavitcher Rebbe, and also our Rebbe, that was the current Rebbe, also spoke about this in a discourse, a very famous teaching, and he spoke about it in 1985. And he said, spiritually, what is the inner teaching of this Torah? Because we're always looking for L'chaim, everybody. It was Sheva Chaya's birthday in Tzfat, so in case she comes on, I want everybody to testify. I have her glass with water. So it says that when he's saying, when the Haftarah is saying, there is one woman, Isha. First of all, the first 2 letters form Aish, which is a fire, and the letter Hey represents God, and Isha represents the neshama, the soul, the feminine, the soul within us. And it's a princess. It's godly. It's an extension of God. It says our soul is literally godly. It's an extension of God. And he said, turn to God. Turn to the soul within you. That's what Elisha is saying. Turn to the soul within you. And she says, my husband, your servant, my husband died, and he was the father of these sons. So in Kabbalah, father is referring to Chachma, wisdom, and mother is referring to Bina, understanding. So she said, my husband died. My intellectual commitment and my intellectual excitement for Judaism is dead. So a person is coming to say they're not inspired. That fire in them is out. It's dead. That commitment is dead. I am not intellectually motivated to pursue Judaism. So this is what the soul says to God. And she says, I have no desire to pursue Torah, learning of Torah and doing mitzvahs. And the other side, the impure side, the side that might be pulled into the secular world, the secular energies of life, are coming to take my 2 sons. So in Kabbalah, children are considered offshoots. They're like a son and a daughter represent love of God and awe or fear of God. So we have the mother in the story. We have the father, Ovadia, who died. That's Chachma. We have the mother who's Bina, and she's saying, there's no commitment on those levels. There's no excitement. There's no stimulation. And they're coming to take my two children, my love of God and my fear of God. And I am not motivated emotionally to live as a Jew. I have fear. I fear the earthquakes. I fear the terrors. I fear the politics. I fear the neighborhood. I fear everything around me. And what do I love? I love cake. I love cookies. I love ice cream. So it's, what should I do? What should I do is what she's asking Elisha. I am about to lose everything. I'm going through spiritual bankruptcy. So Elisha says to the soul, to the woman, tell me, do you have any, and he's saying this to the neshama. He's saying, neshama, as he says to, tell me, do you have anything left in your house? And what does the neshama answer? I have a small jug of olive oil. So one of the things we know about olive oil is when you mix the oil with liquid, it rises to the surface. And how do you get olive oil? It's not as easy as making orange juice. It's the crushing of the juice. You have to crush the olive to get the purest oil out of the olive. And this represents the spark of the soul that can never be diluted, because the olive oil rises to the surface. It doesn't mix with the water. So this spark that lies within the neshama, that lies within the soul, can never be diluted. And the spark says, I am a Jew, no matter what I have done, no matter where I have been, that I am a Jew. And God, and the prophet says to God, and then God says to that soul, what do you have left? And what do you have left? You have that little jug of oil. You have that spark that lies within you. So he says, get a lot of vessels, get a lot of utensils, take activities, put on your tefillin if you're a man, light your Shabbos candles if you're a woman, put up your mezuzahs, study Torah, give tzedakah, eat kosher, go to classes, even if you're not intellectually or emotionally motivated or feel it. Keep doing things, fill those jugs, fill those vessels up, keep pouring. Force yourself to do it, to do more, to take action, keep pouring, keep doing, even if you don't feel it. And you know what? And then the feeling will come. The pouring of the spark of your soul into Torah and mitzvahs will affect your actions. You never know what just lighting that one candle will do for you. Putting up that mezuzah as you walk into your house, what it will do for you. And the same is true in a marriage. And it says that if you pour the spark of your soul into action, you really take things by the horns and you take action. It says it will resurrect you. And most important, it's what it will do for you, for your future, for the generations that follow you. And it says also, when we're talking about in a marriage, if you want it to be loving, give lovingly, and then love will come. And there's a story I heard today from Rebbetzin Malka Friedman from Jerusalem. I was privileged enough to go to her classes, and when I was in Israel, and there's a wonderful woman from Los Angeles who sends her classes every week, and they're really quite inspiring. So some of the Parsha I learned from her, but she told this wonderful story that I want to share with you. I just don't want to miss any details. So here we go. So she said, the story is about a rabbi. His name was Shalom of Kamimker. The story takes place probably 200 years ago. And it says, and he also was a Rebbe that brought smiles. He always made people happy. He always was bringing smiles to people. So somebody from the village next to Kaminka came to him and told him that they had a mikveh in town. And the mikveh was in a terrible state of disrepair, and women didn't want to use the mikveh. It was in such, and it was even a danger to go into the mikveh. It was just run down and falling apart. And then, as now, money was needed to repair it, and there was no one who had money. So the people from the village came to Rabbi Kaminka in his village and told him this sad story. And he said, is there anyone that couldn't support the mikveh? And they said, well, there's one very wealthy man that lives in the town, but he's very stingy and he would never give money for the mikveh. So Rabbi Shalom says, make an announcement that I'm going to be visiting, that I'm coming to town for Shabbos, and tell people after Shabbos, I'll take it's called a kvittel. People give a little note and they ask for a special blessing. And, hi Leah. And they ask for requests. So he says, tell people that I'm going to be taking requests after Shabbos. So people come to him ask for blessings, and lo and behold, this very rich, stingy man comes and he asks the Rebbe for a blessing. And the Rebbe says, what can I do to help you? And he said, I'd like a blessing that my wife die. So he says, what? And he says, again, I want my wife to die. I don't like her. I don't want to be with her. She's so grumpy and argumentative, and he's going on and on. So the Rebbe says to him, well, why don't you just divorce her? And he says, no, then I'd have to pay her a lot of money, and she'd always be in my life. I want a blessing that she die. So the Rabbi Shalom thought a minute. He says, there's a Gemara, and in the Gemara it says, if you make a vow to do something and you don't fulfill the vow, then your spouse will die. He says, perfect. What should I do? So the Rabbi Shalom says to him, the mikveh needs to be rebuilt. Why don't you make a vow that you will take on yourself the whole entire responsibility for the building of the mikveh? You'll build the mikveh, you'll make sure it's upkept, you'll take all the financial responsibility on yourself, and we'll even make a contract to that effect. So he says, perfect, absolutely perfect. So they sign the contract, and okay. A month later, he comes back to the rabbi, and he says to him, my wife is as healthy as ever. She's not getting sick. It's not working. So the rabbi says, let me think for a minute. And he says, it's not working because she's not really your wife. You're not treating her as your wife. You're not fulfilling your obligation that you promised in the ketubah. So he says you have to, be attentive to her, and you have to buy her the nicest foods and the nicest clothing, and whatever was in the ketubah, you have to make sure that's happening so she really is your wife, and then it'll work. Great advice. I'm going to do that. So he comes back a month later and he says to him, Rabbi, my wife is very sick, but I don't want her to die. He said, it's the first time in our life that we're getting along so well. We really enjoying each other's company, and we have shalom bayis, which means peace in our home. And she's speaking to me always so kindly and nicely, and now I don't want her to die. So the rabbi says, let me think for a moment. He goes, I got it. You'll fulfill the vow. And once you fulfill the vow that you promised, then there'll be no reason for her to die, and she'll stay alive. And so the city got their mikveh. So anyway, so that's the story. But from this, it relates back to the Haftorah, saying that you have to work on keeping that spark alive. So the story, when you understand the story of this woman filling the jugs of oil, and you understand that spark, that we have that spark inside of us, that we each do, and especially in these difficult times, that we have to keep on going no matter what, that we have to keep on learning, that we have to keep on doing good things, that we have to keep on feeding that part of ourselves until that spark will on its own catch fire. And then once that spark catches fire, then it's even with more enthusiasm and with more input. So when I was looking over the Haftorah, I just wanted to share it because I thought it was really very, very inspiring. It also says about that Haftorah that whatever you will take on, whatever a person would take on, that keeps that spark alive is passed on to future generations. So I'll just share a short story. I think I shared it before in my classes, but I'll share a short story. And the story is that after the war, there was a man that came into the Rebbe. It was either the previous Rebbe or the Frierdiker Rebbe or the Rebbe that was the current Rebbe's office. And I think it was the Frierdiker Rebbe, and he had come back from Europe. He had been sent by the highest committee, the Hebrew Association Committee, to go and to see to needs of the devastated Jews that were in Europe. And so he came back and he asked for an audience with the Rebbe. And he came into the Rebbe and he said to the Rebbe, he was not a chassid of the Rebbe, but he said to the Rebbe, I wanted to come and see you because when I was traveling around helping people in Europe reestablish their lives, he said, there was a 10-year-old boy, and I asked him, what could I get you? What could I give you? And he said, the only thing I want is to see the Rebbe. And he said, I had to come and see that of anything he could have asked for, why he would have asked to see the Rebbe. And the Rebbe asked him about his travels in Europe, and they sat and they wept together. They wept and they wept over the devastation and the reports that he was giving to the Rebbe of what he had seen in Europe and what the recovery was needed. And the man, when he finished, he was an Orthodox man, and he said to the Rebbe, I'd like a blessing for my children, that my children be connected, to their Jewish souls. And the Rebbe didn't give him a blessing for his children. He gave him a blessing for his grandchildren. He skipped the whole topic of his children, and he gave him a blessing for his grandchildren. And then this man left the room. And there was another chassid of the Rebbe that was outside the room, and it was his turn to come in next. And he came into the room, and the Rebbe said, Mr. So-and-so was here, and he gave me a report, and he told him a little bit about the story and about giving over the blessings. He blessed him for his grandchildren. And this chassid thought it was very odd because the Rebbes never would disclose what they said or who they were speaking to. Anyway, let's say 40 years went by, and the chassid's son was running a Chabad house. And many times in years past, in many of the Chabad houses that were started by young Hasidim, they would bring out their older, I was going to say elderly, but they were probably younger than me. They would bring out their older parents, and they would come to the Chabad houses, in Buffalo, New York, and in Austin, Texas, and in Iowa, and we used to go to Berkeley, and Rabbi Drizzin's father used to come, with his long white beard, and Fabrang, all these older Hasidim that had so much depth and so much sparks of Judaism and their souls alive within them. And they would Fabrang with the college students and speak to them. And so this man, this Hasid who had been into the Frierdiker Rebbe, he came into this college, and he gave over this story, and he was Fabranging. He was there for Shabbos, and then after Shabbos, he was doing a Fabranging, a gathering, and telling different Hasidic stories. And he told this story, out of the blue, it popped into his mind, and he told the story of this time that he went into the Frierdiker Rebbe, and before him was this man, Mr. So-and-so, and he remembered his name, and he said his name, and he told the whole story of what happened to the Rebbe. And after he finished with that story, a young woman who I happen to know personally, who lives in Eretz Yisrael now, came over to him, and she had been coming, it was a new experience for her connecting to her Judaism, and she had been coming on occasion to the Chabad house. And she said to this rabbi who spoke, she said, that was my grandfather. And a few weeks later, this rabbi passed away. And it's just a wild story. She was from Minnesota, and she got very deeply connected and is a teacher and an inspiring human being today. But she heard her own story. She heard the blessing that was given really for her from the Frierdiker Rebbe. So when you hold on to a spark, you don't know when it will catch on or who it will catch on to. So I want to give us all a blessing that we can pass these sparks on, not only to our children. You know, I think of my grandparents, and not my grandparents so much because they kind of left the path of Judaism when they came to America, but my great-grandparents. I know how they lived. I know what they looked like. I know what they believed in. I know how my great-grandmother must have sang over her Shabbos candles and prayed that her great-grandchild would still keep Torah mitzvahs. So we should have the blessing that we can be inspiring to ourselves first and then inspiring to our families and our neighborhoods in the world. So l'chaim. And now we're going to go into the Parsha. A little into the Parsha, and this is the first teaching that I'm going to be sharing is a teaching that I learned with Rebbetzin Friedman. And if anybody is interested, I can always send information of who these people are that I listen to and where you can find them. Okay, so in the previous weeks we had Parshas Bereshis. Then we had Parshas Noach, then we had Parshas Lech Lecha, and now we had Parshas Vayeira. And these are like powerhouse Parshas. And there's still the weeks that we're coming out of the Yom Tovim, out of the Jewish holidays, into a new life, a new creation, because each time there's something new that we're bringing into the world. When we celebrate the holidays, we're not celebrating something that we're repeating historically. We're celebrating something new that's coming into the world. And in all these different parshas from Bereshis, there was this fundamental battle between good and evil. And we see in the world today, you know, everything is written in the Torah, and we see there are so many good people. There's so much light in the world. There's so much, you know, and we have a choice. We can either focus on the light or we can focus on the darkness. So it's our choice. It's our choice. Like it's our choice to focus on simcha, on joy. It's our choice. So it says, how was man created and what was man created to do? So we're going back, like this is what these previous parshas are talking about. It's talking about the beginning of creation. And what are the fundamentals of what our work is? What is our work in the world? What are we supposed to be doing? And what is mankind? So it goes on to teach that when we understand Avram Avinu, Avram our father, and his tests and his choices that he made and his commitments to be responsible in the world, it says he did it for all of us because he was the first one. It wasn't a time where people took on commitments and responsibilities. And we know last week's Parsha, we had the covenant. He made the covenant that we just came out of, the covenant of passing between the parts. And so now we're going forward. So it says when Adam was created, the first man was created, it was a combination of two opposites. There was the neshama, the soul, and then there was the body. And they are total opposite. And there's no commonality except that God put the body and the soul together to form one unit. And so we have also the two opposite forces of good and evil. And Adam made that choice. He could have chosen only the good, but he didn't. And he was in the middle. And when you're in the middle, you choose which way you want to go. You choose which way you want to connect to. So it says that if he had been chosen only the path of the good, then the neshama, the soul, would have taken over, and it would have been in the ascendancy. And the intellect is where the intellect sits in the brain, and that's the center of the neshama. And so this would have taken over and the world might have been different. But that wasn't the job at the time. It wasn't the divine providence of what was supposed to happen. And because we don't feel the strength, we don't feel the koach of the neshama in the body. We feel the body is everything. And maybe in quiet meditation, we can come to have some aspect of it. And that is why meditation is so good, because it can center you into that place of the neshama. So, and the main place it dwells is in the brain. So the intellect overrides the other parts of the body, and it draws from the koach, from the strength of the neshama, and we feel this as our source. If we can be quiet enough, and the neshama has a profound capacity for the life force and the vitality and for intellectual awareness. So the body can also grow in intellectual awareness. The body can go up in elevation after elevation after elevation, and it can become it is the vehicle for the neshama, for the soul, but it can feel like the vehicle. It can feel like the vehicle for the soul. So it says Moses, take for example Moses. So it says that his neshama, his soul, did not want to leave his body. God had to kiss his soul out of his body to get it to leave. And his body was as high as his soul. It reached that level that it had that ability to be as lofty as his soul and connected, that his body and soul were on the same spiritual level, and he could have had infinite spiritual pleasure if he had stayed alive, but he didn't. God had to kiss that neshama out of him. So it says that before Avram Avinu, God was pushed out of the world on 7 different levels, and Avram Avinu pulled God back into the world through his challenges and through his tests. And he had these tests and that he gave to us also. We also go through these tests in our life, and we have to know that God is close. Hashem is close. And how do we bring Hashem into our life? Through our challenges. And it says, just like it says that Avram Avinu had 10 tests he went through, that we also have 10 challenges to go through. And we do have the koach, we do have the strength to meet the challenges. So the parsha, this Torah parsha opens up, and it talks about how Hashem revealed himself to him. It doesn't say the name Avraham. It says God revealed himself to him. So in the Zohar, it says that God reveals himself to every Jew. That's what it means when it says God reveals himself to him on the Zoharic level, that God reveals himself to every Jew. And it says that Avram saw 3 people approaching. We know it was 3 angels, but when we take it as ourselves, that God is revealing himself to us, and we see 3 people approaching, every Jew has Avram and Sarah and Yitzhak and Rivka and Yaakov and Leah and Rachel approaching them. But we can get sucked into the darkness of this world, into a level that has the negative things. But within that spark we talked about before, that is never crushed, that is never hidden totally forever, God will reveal himself to us. And we will never be abandoned. I mean, that is really something that we have to really remember and focus on. We will never be abandoned. And we have to cry out for that. We have the strength of the mamas and the papas. Remember that rock band, the mamas and the papas? Actually, here's a little bit of trivia. That Mama Cass, who was the only Jew in the group, so there was once an article in the Jewish Jerusalem Post that was talking about kosher, and it said nobody ever died from eating, non-kosher. It was some sarcastic article, and I have a dear friend that lives in Jerusalem, and she wrote, oh yes, Mama Cass did. She choked on a ham sandwich, and that's how she died. So she was part of the mamas and the papas, the only Jewish mama in the group, but we have mamas and papas, and they're buried in the Machpelah. They're buried, except for Rachel, they're buried in the holy city of Hebron, and we have their strength, we have their koach, and we have their protection. So an angel comes to Sarah, and the Zohar said that she laughed when the angel told her she was going to have a child. And it says that she laughed at the salvation. She laughed out of total joy, exhilaration of getting the news that all her life's work will continue. Her pain, the loneliness in choosing to stand up for God by herself, all that would come to be perpetuated through her son Yitzhak. And that gave her tremendous joy. And he was a perpetuation of her joy in the world. And it says a person can experience that joy and can know that God has created Yeshua, has created salvations for me, has protected me on so many levels that we can also feel that joy. And these are just things, there are signposts that absolutely can help us, can help us remember. So now the Parsha also talks about Lot, who was the nephew of Avram Avinu, and the Zohar talks about it in an interesting way. It says that he was a disciple. There are many different opinions of who he was and how he was, but he was a disciple of Avram Avinu, and he journeyed with Avram, and he went to Egypt with them, and he stayed with him until there was a disagreement in Jewish law between the servants of Abraham and the servants of Lot. And it says that Avram demanded that he left Egypt with great wealth, and he had hundreds of thousands of animals that needed to be muzzled. And they muzzled their animals every day. You can imagine how much work it was to muzzle that many animals, so that they would not eat from the grass of land that did not officially belong to Abraham, that it would become under the category of stealing. And then they had to be unmuzzled when they would be taken to the land from which they could eat. So the servants of Lot said, why should we go to so much work? This land was promised to be Abraham's. It's going to be Abraham's anyway, so why can't he just use it now? And that was the point where they separated and went their own ways. So Lot went to, it talks about this story of Sodom and Gomorrah. Lot went to Gomorrah, and it says it was Gan Eden as far as its beauty, but it was filled with wickedness. So what happened? Lot separated himself, in a sense, from his Rebbe, from his holy teacher, who was Avraham. And that provided for him his ability to connect to God. And it brought destruction on him and his family. And by being in a bad place with bad people, he cut himself off from Torah. So we learned something from this. Number one, we have to be careful. Where we work, where do I work? Is it a God-fearing place or not? Does it lead to connection? Does it lead to unity? Does it lead to holiness? And if not, is it worth staying in this place? We have to be careful who we're around. We have to be careful not to sever any bond with the knowledge of Torah, that we have to have guidance, we have to have instruction, insight, and we have to be proactive to keep this ongoing in our life. You know, it's not like we reach a point where, that's why I think I like going to the spa. You know, you can take 3 days and kick back and go to the spa, but even there, you know, you eat your food, you say a blessing, you give charity every day, you learn Torah wherever you are, that we can't separate ourselves, that it has to become like in our flesh. It's an integral part of our lives and our being. So now we also come to a very big story, the Akedas Yitzhak. And it's a time of difficulty. Anytime it says that we have harshness in our life. Akedas Yitzhak means the sacrifice of Isaac, which I think everybody knows the story. Raise your hand if you don't. I won't see it, but if you don't know the story, I'll tell it quickly, but somebody could just say. So it was the sacrifice of Isaac. When God said to Abraham, take your son Isaac and sacrifice him on Mount Moriah. So it says that the harshness we undergo in life, the difficulties, have a connection to that time, that test. And what does it say? Abraham was told not just to bring Isaac as a korban, as a sacrifice, but to bring him with simcha, to bring him with joy that every step that he took, not just the commitment to go and sacrifice his son, but every step that he took towards that had to be with simcha, and also that every step that Yitzhak took in going with him also had to be by simcha, with joy, with appreciation. And it says each step. So it says, and therefore, because there was that simcha connected to doing the mitzvah, connected to doing the commandment, Yitzhak was called a pure sacrifice, a korban tamid. So it says, and we live off this now, this sacrifice. It says, Yitzhak was tied to the altar, and he asked Abraham to bind his hands behind his back, to stretch his neck so everything would be 100% perfect. And it says that his participation with joy made it into this level of purity. And thousands of sacrifices and offerings have been done since that time in every generation, in all the exiles for many years, and it all stems back to the sacrifice of Isaac. It's all connected to that original one. And so we ask God to remember this. We get, especially on Rosh Hashanah, we ask him to remember this, and for the sacrifices that all the generations have made in all the years to follow. And this is who we are. We're a people who have lived by Mesiras Nefesh, live through tremendous sacrifice. And it does bring pain and suffering, but God is, as we said before in the beginning of studying this parsha, that God will answer us, and God does answer us, and he doesn't abandon us. And we have to hold on to that, and we have to take strength from that. And ultimately, we are going to have the redemption. So it says that the sacrifice of the mamas and papas, from them we live with them, we live with the times, we live with the understanding of what they went through. And there will be a renaissance after this time of destruction. There we will merit to see the rebuilding of the temple. And we will have strength, and all our challenges that we have in life add on to this strengthening that we go through. Okay, so we're going to continue. This is a little teaching from Rabbi Raskin. We're just going to have a little l'chaim drink. Hi, Stella. I hope you're having your l'chaim. Okay, so we're gonna talk a little bit about circumcision. And circumcision, we know, is done on the 8th day. I feel like I should have the 8th day band backing me up when I'm talking. So the 8th day is connected to redemption. The 8th day is the day that a physical circumcision on a baby child is performed. And it says that the harp of the future will have 8 strings. So it says, God says, circumcise the foreskin of our heart and remove any temptations of the world. So I did say last week at one point we'll talk about the details of the circumcision of the heart. It's not going to be this week, but we will talk about it in detail. But it is about, when we're talking now about the physical circumcision, which we will be talking about Avram's circumcision and Yitzhak's circumcision, and the circumcision of our lifetimes and how it affects us in the world. But we have to know it's about the circumcision of the heart, taking that heart of stone and uncovering the heart of flesh that really beats behind it and really lies within it. So the first commandment that was given to Avram was to perform the bris, and it says he gave this to Avraham. And what is the purpose of every mitzvah? This mitzvah and every mitzvah, every commandment is refinement, is to refine the person, to make the person, to refine them in the physical, to refine them in the spiritual, to make them more receptive and open to godliness. And so in the physical circumcision, before there was a foreskin, now after the circumcision there is not. And it says every mitzvah should bring a transformation. You know, we really should have the time that before we perform a mitzvah to take a breath, to stop, to think, to remember what we're doing, to remember that we're connecting ourselves to God and godliness, that we're not just, knocking down those blessings. I'm thirsty and I want to quickly say a blessing and gulp my water. No, it should be the understanding that we're refining ourselves by saying the mitzvah. And, I see we're taking roll call. Robin is here. Hi, Robin. And that you've come in on the refinement part. And that we're refining ourselves and that we're making ourselves vessels for godliness, vehicles for godliness. That's our job in the world, this transformation. So we have the word bris, and it equals the number 612. And there's those who say if you take the 612 and you add onto that the word bris itself, we have the 613 mitzvahs. And the mitzvah of circumcision in Hebrew, the word is called milah. And it's a general mitzvah, and it affects all other mitzvahs. And we know how to perform the mitzvahs. And in the Zohar, it is said, who can ascend to the heavens? So in Kabbalah, it says, Mi yala lanu ha-shemaima. So it says if you take the first letter of each of these four words, it spells the word milah. And if you take the last letter of each of these four words, it spells the yud and the hey and the vav and the hey, name of God. And we know that when we're working with words, the first letter has more importance than the second letter. So when we spell, the first letters all spell milah, circumcision. The last letters spell God's name. So we know that the milah in some aspect is even higher than the name of God. So this name of God, the Yud and the Hey and the Vav and the Hey, name of God equals a level of infinity. And infinity comes from the contraction, from the quality of what we call tzimtzum, the contraction of the godly light till it can be used in the world. So the Yud stands for, of the first of the letter of God's name, stands for concept. The Hey stands for understanding, the Vav stands for emotions, and the last Hey stands for actions. So we know that, but when we take the word milah, that we take from this also, it says this mitzvah is done on the 8th day. So the 8th day is one beyond the natural order. So it's from the time beyond. And it also has to go through a Shabbos. So the 8th day always goes through, it's a full week, including a Shabbos. So it's even higher than the name of God. It's like the beyond of the beyond. So it says that, and we do Torah, and we do 613 mitzvahs, or as many as we can. And even if we violate our mitzvahs, even if we don't do our part, God still has to give us all we need. And God does give us all we need. And it says to love God and to have awe of God, to have fear of God is very difficult. These are not easy things to accomplish. It's easy for me to say, love God. It's easy for me to say, have awe of God. But they're not, it doesn't come easy. That's why I always give a plug for meditation. Because I really feel that meditation is an aid to reach these levels of love and fear of God, and love and awe of God. So it says, one second. Okay, so there's this power of doing a mitzvah that has an impact on a person on every level. So even in difficulty and challenges, we should be able to see God in every level of life. So I want to go on and say that 4 Rebbes back was the Rebbe Rashab. So it says that every year on his birthday, he visited his grandfather, who is the Rebbe Tzemach Tzedek. And when he was 4 or 5 years old, he went in and he asked, and he was crying. He went into his grandfather, the Rebbe Tzemach Tzedek, and he was crying. And his grandfather asked him why he was crying. And he said that he had just heard from someone that God revealed himself to our father, Avram, and he was crying because God never revealed himself to him, to this young child. And the Tzemach Tzedek answered him. He said, when a Jew, a tzaddik, decides at the age of 99 years old that he ought to circumcise himself, he deserves that God should reveal himself to him. So this story happened when the Rebbe Rashab was still a child, and his yortzeit, today is the 17th, is on this Shabbos. So his birthday is this coming Shabbos. So this happened when he was still a child, and his crying was because God did not reveal himself to him. So what does that teach us? How does that relate to us? So it teaches us that regardless of any of our spiritual state that we're in, we can demand that God reveal himself to us, just like he revealed himself to Abraham. We can ask for it, we can beg for it, we can even demand it. And we demand with insistence. And how do we know there's insistence? Because of the crying. For crying is an aspect of seeking something with insistence. You only have to watch a 2-year-old that wants a candy, and they're going to be crying with insistence. We hope we're more mature than that we cry over something more important. So there's an aspect that transcends intellect and transcends reason, and that is no longer able to bear the condition of not having that. And there's an overflow from the intellect, and it's expressed in these tears. Like, we can't bear the thought of not having that revelation of God in the world. So, you can feel it, you can hear it, you can see it, how a person can long for that and feel a distance when they don't have it. And it says that this applies to everyone. It doesn't mean age-wise. It doesn't mean it's not only talking about the 4 or 5 year old. It's even talking about the person who might already be an adult, but spiritually is still like a child who has not yet reached the age of instruction. Because we train a child from a young age in going to bring into their lives things of sanctity and how to avoid sin, because we train them. You train as a young child. You see people that are great musicians today that started when they were children. So it is possible. It says train the child according to his way, and he will follow it the rest of his life. So that and all the different things depend on the different maturity of the level of the child and the level of us. We always look at ourselves when we talk about children as being the child. And the Rebbe used to say that Jewish years are not measured by the birth certificate, because according to your birth certificate, you could be an old person, but according to one's true spiritual age, meaning in terms of observance of Torah and mitzvahs, one is still a small child, like a small child playing under the table. So just because we're a certain age doesn't mean that we're not spiritually much younger. Although we'd like to have that spiritual youngness. Hi, Hindela, on our faces. So, but we can be older in age, and we can have this spiritual, we're new at it, and we have to give ourselves that kindness, just like you would give kindness to a child. And you would give them delicacies, and you would try to entice them in many, many different ways to love God and to love Torah and to observe in this way. That we have to treat ourselves like that, with that kind of eye, with that kind of spirit, and know that even if we are older, ancient, but spiritually we're young, and we can have that enthusiasm, we can have that trust. So it says one can demand that God reveal himself as he did to Abraham after he fulfilled the mitzvah of circumcision, because it was then that God appeared to him. So it says there are different names of God that correspond to the way that God reveals himself in the world. And the name of God, the 4-letter name of God, refers to the highest category of revelations. And there are many gradations to the name of God. And it says God revealed himself to Abraham with the high level of his name even prior to his circumcision, but The circumcision gave him the ability to have a superior level of revelation in terms of it being not only a greater manifestation, but a greater way that he was able to absorb it in his life. So that there are different levels and that we can attain those levels at different stages in our life. But that circumcision, and we're talking about the circumcision of our hearts also, so that when we come to a certain place, not only for the circumcision of Abraham in the flesh, but also for the circumcision in our behavior and in our life and in our meditations, in our prayers and all of that, that we can achieve the revelation on a certain level that can be more manifest and can express itself in a different way in our physicality. So, and it says that his name was changed to Avraham with an additional hey. So at first he was called Avram, and the numerical equivalent was 243, and then God gave him mastery over 243 of the 248 limbs, and after that he gave him mastery of the 248 by calling him Avraham, and he added the letter Hey to his name, and the letter Hey adds what we call the 5 organs over which normally by its nature that the person does not have control of. So the Gemara is saying that this change signifies that he had mastery over these 5 organs, which are the 2 eyes, the 2 ears, and the reproductive organ. And his original name was without a hey, because then he could master only what he could do naturally. But later, by putting in the effort, that God granted him a mastery over things that he could not have attained a mastery on his own, those elements which under natural conditions he could not master. And there are many examples that we're going to come to that are explaining what this is talking about, because it says that it was just more refined. It wasn't that everything was just brand new, but he was able to receive on a much more refined level. And it says, so every Jew, even those that have not yet reached the stage of instruction in their spiritual life that would merit that or that would lead to that, they can still demand that God reveal himself to them as he did to Avraham, even on the level that he was on after the circumcision. Why? Because Avraham opened the gates for us. It's like he opened the pipes for us, so that he might have had to struggle and work hard to receive that level of revelation. But because he was able to achieve it, now we can achieve it, but we have to work for it. We have to ask for it. We can even cry for it, because the pain of not having it could be that great. So it says every Jew must demand, or may demand, that God reveal himself to them. But one should know that circumcision is essential, regardless of all levels they have attained. Meaning, we have to put the work into it. We can't just kick back and say, okay, now we want that level of revelation. What is the circumcision? Again, it's the refinement. It's the refining of our hearts. It's changing that heart of stone. It's refining the mitzvahs, doing them in a more and more clear and careful way, so that then we will have the potential to be able to receive godliness on a much more refined level, just like Avraham did. And it says potentially every Jew can reach the highest of levels, because we can all say, when shall my deeds approach the deeds of my ancestors, Avram and Sarah, Yitzhak and Rivka, Yaakov and Leah and Rachel. The very fact that we mention Avraham at the same time as Yitzhak and Yaakov indicates that we're referring to Avraham after his circumcision, when he was in a more refined state, when he achieved that level of clarity and spiritual elevation in a different way. And it says that even those that are in possession of these qualities, meaning even the purely righteous, the tzaddikim, who, like Avraham, are in control of over all their organs, which normally one cannot control, have to have circumcision. So there's a story told about the Rebbe Rashab, and he was saying that he wasn't able to hear. He was complaining of his inability to hear with one ear, and when he was searching for the cause, he realized that he was in Farbrengen on Shabbos when he was giving over Hasidus, and there was other talking in the room, and not in even in the adjoining room, and it was very hard for him to give over and hear the talking at the same time. So he turned off his ability to hear, and he removed that sense of hearing from the ear that was facing that adjoining room. And it's even mentioned in a mimer that there were tzaddikim who were able to divest themselves of certain levels of sight or hearing because it interfered with their divine soul was doing at the moment. So these holy tzaddikim were able to master senses that normally one cannot. But even they had to go through a process of circumcision. Even they had to have that level of refinement constantly. And the circumcision, one of the interesting things it says about the physical circumcision of a young boy or Avram or Yitzhak is that it's in the flesh. So it's not a circumcision that was done, it's not a mitzvah that was done once and then you put it aside and you never pick it up again. It's a mitzvah that's done continuously every day. And it says for girls that girls have that level of circumcision, women, at birth, which it comes 8 days earlier than it does for boys, and therefore there is that level of a girl maturing earlier, and that a bas mitzvah is at 12 years old and a bar mitzvah is at 13 years old. And I could never understand, in terms of equality, why certain the Jewish pathways would make a girl's bas mitzvah at 13. It was kind of like her status, it's taking away one of her gifts, which is that level of maturity and responsibility for mitzvahs that comes at an earlier point, because her circumcision, her level of purification and refinement is exactly at the moment of birth. So it says, it says that even a spiritual foreskin can evolve into coarseness. And that is why we talk about circumcision and circumcision of the heart, because there is a spiritual foreskin over the heart, and it can lead to temptations, and it can lead to coarse things of the world, and we need to refine it. We need to also circumcise that part of us. So it goes on to say that when a Jew, a holy person, a tzaddik, reaches the age of 99 years old, and he requires circumcision, and he does it, he deserves the revelation of God to him at that time. So, goes on to say, everybody has their Kabbalah seatbelts on, I hope. At the age of 100 years, everybody has what we call 10 soul powers, which reflect the 10 sphirot, which are the energy emanations with which the world was created. So, and all of the 10 themselves divide into 10. It says there are 10 general soul powers or potencies that relate to the 10 sphirot. This is, if you want to look in your book of Tanya in chapter 3, you can go into it a little more depth. And each of these subdivides into 10. So it's like compounding the different aspects one into another, just like the different sphirot are divided. So the sphirot that we talk about between Passover and Shavuos, when we're counting what we call the Omer, the Chesed, the loving kindness, and the Gevurah, the severity, and the Tiferes, the beauty, and the Netzach, Hod, Yesod, and Malchus, each of those have each other within them. So when we take all 10 and we go and we refine the 10 within the 10, which we won't go into in depth, you'll have to trust me on it, that adds up to 100 sub-powers. So it says that when one gets to this level, one no longer need fear anything, because you don't have to fear earthquakes, you don't have to fear terror, you can let go of that level of fear, because one's no longer subject to mundane affairs. and it says, at 100 years, one is as if dead and passed and ceased from the world. So we want to know what this expression means, because all of us want to be 100 or more. So it requires further looking at. So it says in the Mishnah, there is relevant instruction on how to conduct oneself. It says at 5 years is the age for the study of Scripture, 10 years for the study of Mishnah, 13 years for the fulfillment of mitzvahs. So what does it mean at 100 years, one is as if dead and passed and ceased from the world? So it means the following: that when one has sublimated all 10 soul powers in all its different details, like we said, one in the one, and in the one, and the one, and then it is as if the person has passed and ceased from the world, meaning they no longer belong to the world. They're no longer related to mundane affairs and no longer need to fear, and they know as if they do not have a Yetzer Hara, as if they do not have an evil inclination. But at the age of 99, something is still missing in the refinement of all the 10 soul powers, and there is that need for circumcision, and that is why Avram Avinu needed to be circumcised at the age of 99, because there is still the possibility of a degeneration to coarseness, and we want to avoid that at all costs. But when there is this level of self-negation that we call bitul, that is the realization that one must circumcise themselves, the realization that one must work on themselves, that they are aware that their present condition is insufficient, that one must change, because before, remember in the beginning of the class, we were talking about the circumcision and mitzvahs is transformation, that one has to understand that they still have to change to reach higher and higher levels. And it says, then God appeared just as he did to our father Abraham. God will appear to that person just like he appeared to Abraham after his circumcision, on that level, and the level that one can master all their senses, even those that they normally could not control. That is a goal. That is a goal in the life of refinement and going towards spirituality and going towards asking that God reveal himself to yourself. So also, one assumes control over their part of the world. So it means that the various spiritual and material parts and aspects within creation that are associated with the individual, a person must purify and sublimate not only themselves personally, but their part or share of the world by using it to relate to it in a divinely ordained context of one's work and destiny in life. Where you find yourself today in 2020, whatever November day it is today, that it's to refine the part of the world you're in with a kind word, with a nice smile, with whatever it is. I go walking on the beach every morning, except Shabbos, and I go to the same beach every morning, and you see the same 2 or 3 people every day at dawn picking up any garbage on the beach that was left the night before. People who want to purify their atmosphere, and it is really something very special to see, and you know, warm smile, and they're just cleaning up their environment, making their environment more refined and more beautiful for everyone. I remember that when we have our oldest child, Hanala, is developmentally delayed. That's the proper way you say it today. And she's blind. And she went to a camp. She used to go to a school called the Foundation for the Junior Blind. And she went to a summer camp up in the Malibu Mountains that was for blind and mostly for blind children and other multi-handicapped children. And I remember once when we took her up there, I was just astounded by the level of beauty that was there, because they had like flowers under trees and paintings in odd places, and the whole community that was up there, the kids were blind. And I just thought that it was a level of purifying and beautifying the atmosphere, so that energetically these kids could feel that they were in a beautiful place. It was just really a tremendous learning experience. And I want to say good morning to Sheva Chaya. I have water in your cup. shevachaya.com or something like that to order your hand-blown glasses from the holy city of Sfat. So I'm very excited, Sheva Chaya. I used to just drink out of a ugly bottle, but now I drink out of this beautiful cup. Okay, so we have to purify our environment. We have to purify our place also. That's one level of circumcision also, this purification of the place that we're in. And it says that we have to master our parts of the world and all those things that we need to serve God, no matter what it is, everything. And we should have it in a bountiful way. So to continue, it says one of the qualities that our father Abraham attained through this precept of circumcision was a fitness to give birth to Yitzhak. And he was born from a holy source, and it is said he was sanctified from the womb. So it says Avram was a vehicle for divinity, for godliness in the world, even before the circumcision, but he was not yet on the level to be the father of Yitzhak until he reached the level of wholeness and completion. And he did this by the means of circumcision, and only then could Isaac's birth become possible. So it says we know that the matriarchs and the patriarchs were called chariots, and all their organs were completely holy and detached from mundane matters, serving as a vehicle for the supreme will throughout their lives. That they just went in that direction of godliness. They were a vessel, a vehicle for godliness. And it also says that there was a superior quality of Yitzhak in relation to Abraham, because Yitzhak's birth could not be until Avram reached this level of wholeness. But Avram didn't have that condition for his birth. He was able to be born. So why was it specifically Yitzhak had to be born from a holy source? So we know that there's a basic difference between Avram and Yitzhak. Avram's task was to cause a drawing forth from above downward. And Isaac's task was to cause a sublimation from below upwards. So Avram was drawing down from the higher worlds down, and Yitzhak was purifying the lower worlds and elevating them. And there are many Hasidic discourses that explain that this love that Avram had, this love of God, was compared to water. And we say in the prayer for rain that we just said in the previous holidays, remember our father Abraham, who was drawn after you like water. So it is the nature of water to descend from a higher plane to a lower one. And the spiritual work of Yitzhak is a love of God, which is compared to flames of fire. And it's the nature of fire to rise, to go from below upwards. So it says that the difference between Abraham and Yitzhak was expressed not only in their personal spiritual work, their personal development, but also in the way that they engaged with the world. So it says Abraham achieved a level of drawing divinity into the world from above downwards, and Yitzhak elevated the world itself and became an instrument for godliness. And so Avram brought divinity to everyone in the land of Canaan, even before the land became Israel, before it was refined, and in Egypt. And it says he even brought divinity to those Arabs who worship the dust of their feet, which is the lowest of all levels. So it goes on to say that a person is divided into three parts. They're divided into head, body, and feet, and the feet are the very lowest part. And the dust of their feet is even lower than their feet. And these people were such that they even bowed before the dust of their feet. That is, they regarded the intellect of their head as inferior to the dust of their feet. And even though that, Avram pursued the task of infusing divinity into them and teaching them what was correct. And it says that he called on the name of God, and it says we shouldn't read it as he called, but he caused others to call. You know, it's like sitting by the fire yourself or inviting everybody who's cold inside. And it says that Avram had one of his highest and holiest ways to be was the mitzvah of hospitality. And he took guests in the desert and he supplied them with their needs. And when they wished to thank him, he told them, bless God. Bless him with food whose possessions you have eaten. Praise him. And he took nothing for himself. So Yitzhak's task was elevation. And it said that Yitzhak had no relation to Egypt, nor to any land outside the Holy Land. He was called a burnt offering without blemish. And what did he do in the land of Israel? He occupied himself with the digging of wells, which signifies a manifestation of divinity by way of elevation, by elevating the lower levels, the lower strata. And because he withdrew from the world, and he drew up from what was below. So he dug wells, which, what does that mean? He revealed and drew forth the living waters, which are to be found in the ground. He did not pour into those holes living waters from another source, but he disclosed the living waters that were found on the spot where he was. And it says that they were not openly found. They were covered by earth and mud and rocks. And it says only when the covering was removed was the living waters revealed. So this indicates the spiritual avoda of Yitzhak, to remove what covers and conceals. Again, his work was to remove what covers and conceals, and to convert the world into an instrument for divinity, just as the living waters gush out from below upwards. And he wasn't concerned with what covered the living waters, and he paid no attention to any adversaries that would interfere with the digging of the wells. The Torah relates that the shepherds of Avimelech came and drove away the shepherds of Yitzhak and filled in the wells, but he didn't care. He wasn't moved by the actions, and he ordered digging again. And even when the wells were dug by Yitzhak's servants, when they were taken away and given to the Philistines, meaning that the vitality and the enthusiasm was given over to the level of unholiness. And he continued digging. And when the second well was taken away, he dug again, and a third one, until it came open to wide expanses. So it says that there's a level to turn that one can go in the way of holiness. There's a level that can go into the way of klipa, of unholiness. And he just kept digging to reveal what the holiness was. And it says that Avimelech was the reigning sovereign, and to interfere, and he wasn't afraid of him, and he was interfering with the digging of the wells of holiness, and he took away the wells. But still, Yitzhak was not concerned. He didn't let it affect him. He didn't give into that with rational calculations. He knew what his job was. His job was to reveal the living waters, and he pursued it with total devotion and mesiras nefesh. He didn't come back and say, oh, I can't do it because he's filling in the wells, and I'm trying to fill him out, and he's filling him in, and it's not going to... He didn't say that. He didn't say that. He kept digging again, and he revealed them again, and he revealed them again. And it says that this avoda of converting the world into a world of an instrument for divinity touches on this level, this boundlessness of what we call the Ein Sof, because this is the intent of creation. It says, Yitzhak is called, God called me laughter, because the purification and the refinement of worldly things which conceal God's presence, he was able to open up. And he elicited what we call supernal laughter and delight. And it talks about the different levels of the name of God. So it says that the name Elohim is the name which comes, that is numerically equivalent to the word for nature. So it says that this name, Elohim, conceals the supernal light which brings the world into existence and gives it light. And it makes it appear as if the world came into existence in a natural way, because it's called a shield and a covering for the name Havaya, for the higher level of God's name. And it was concealing the light and life force of that higher level of name. And this name Elohim signifies divine immanence, and details of creation are manifest and come through the laws of nature. So that we have God within nature and we have God above nature. And he was revealing the level of God that came within nature. And it says this is why it was necessary for him to be born from a holy source, that by fulfilling the precept of circumcision, Avram achieved wholeness, and this aspect of godliness that is transcendent. And this evoked in Isaac that Isaac's service of God could be without limits and no limitations. So it says both Avram and Yitzhak are considered the fathers of every Jew. So every Jew needs to pursue the two types of spiritual work that Abraham and Yitzhak performed. It says when a Jew is occupied with Torah and prayer and fulfilling mitzvahs, and then he's not or she is not involved in worldly matters. And it says that, but even when you're occupied in kind deeds and doing for others and using and fulfilling mitzvahs with physical objects, even then you're still fulfilling the will of God, because the physicality has godliness within it. So anything that is covering or concealing divinity has a connection to divinity. So that it's all about revelation. It's all about revealing this light into the world. That one has to become involved on different levels, not only on this level of revealing God within the material, but also on the transcendent level. That matters which appear superficially to be no more than rocks and mud which cover living waters, matters that appear to be an adversary to divinity, that are even looked to be in violation of different prohibitions of the Torah, one still has to become involved in them and to dig in them and to remove anything that conceals until one can reach the living waters within them and to bring that out into the open. And one could have the argument, I have tried digging once, and I tried digging twice, and I see it's useless. In fact, the Philistines have taken away all my wells. How can I dig further? So the answer comes that one who was sanctified from the womb, meaning Yitzhak, and his offspring, meaning us, that has to be without any calculations. The lack of success up till now is only the concern of God. It is not our concern. What we don't, as far as we are concerned, we have to keep digging and digging until we reach the living waters. And it says, ultimately, we are promised that we will reach the living waters, that we will achieve that. So l'chaim, I want to make a commercial again. I love making commercials. And before we go on to the last piece, so I said in the beginning of the class, if you weren't here, I'm going to say it again, that we are here in Los Angeles. I know there are many people on from many different places in the country and in the world, but in Los Angeles, in the Jewish communities, there is the possibility of discontent and things of a riot or illegal nature. And so we have a wonderful police force that is patrolling in particular, the Jewish neighborhoods. And in order to show our gratitude, there are many, many groups of people that are getting together to send wonderful, hot, warm, loving, kosher meals to the police officers to show our care and love to them. As I said before, you can bring a sandwich from home. It's not about the food. It's about the love behind the food and the care behind the food. And so we have a fund. There is a fund. And not only does it supply kosher meals and showing our gratitude to hundreds of police officers here in Los Angeles who are working 12-hour shifts, not their normal shifts, but 12-hour shifts in order to make sure the whole city is covered and protected at all times for the moment. But it's also giving business to the kosher restaurants that are having a hard time because not everybody's going out. Like, I don't go out anymore to eat or, things like that. I'm more homebound, even though I did have a lovely meal brought in from a kosher restaurant. So I want to give everybody the address. And if you can't remember it, you can always get in touch with me, olivia@chaicenter.org, and I will email you where an account is. But the account is at Venmo, VENMO, at Baila, BAILA -ROM, ROMM, 8560. Again, Venmo at Baila-ROM 8560. This is in order to contribute money of any amount for the gratitude showing to the police officers of Los Angeles. So I want to do one more section on my favorite topic, which is Hachnasis Orachim, on hospitality. So I'll just start with this piece, and then we'll go on to one more, and then we'll finish. It says in the text of Vayeira about Abraham, he lifted his eyes and he saw, and behold, there were 3 men standing beside him, and he saw and he ran toward them. So it says that Avram was circumcised, and he interrupts a visit from God himself in order to host 3 passerbys. And they were angels disguised as travelers. And it teaches us teaches us about hosting guests. And the Rambam says that this is a path our patriarch Avram established, the path of kindness that he followed. He would feed wayfarers, provide them with drink, and accompany them. And it says, showing hospitality for guests surpasses receiving the Shekhinah, the divine presence. And it is written, he saw and he beheld there were 3 men. So here it says that they weren't really men, that they were angels. And angels don't eat or drink. They didn't need the food. So the question is asked, did he fulfill the mitzvah? Did he fulfill the commandment of Haknasis Orachim with this act of hospitality? So you can even say he disturbed his meeting with the presence of God in order to do a mitzvah for those who didn't even qualify for the mitzvah of Haknasis Orachim. So it goes on to say that that's not how we define Haknasis Orachim, that it is defined by the heartfelt concern that the host shows for his guests' well-being and not for what he gives them. So even though there are acts of kindness that are better if you smile than without, and we know that the ideal way that one gives charity is when the receiver and the donor don't even meet face to face. But not that with the mitzvah of Haknasis Orachim, where fulfilling this mitzvah is through showing your guests your personal and sincere concern for their comfort and well-being. So regardless of whether the angels that visited Avram needed or ate the food that he prepared for them, that he fulfilled this mitzvah of Haknasis Orachim with the care he exhibited toward them. And it says, knowing how much Avram was cherished by God, the guests, the angels, appreciated the interest he took in them, and that he put God kind of on hold to greet these guests. So it says that Avram had a tent that was open on 4 sides, and he loved having guests. And it was the 3rd day after the circumcision, which is considered the hardest day. And 3 angels came because he was feeling bad. He didn't have guests. God made the day so hot, the sun so strong, that no one would come. And now he was sad because no one came, so he had 3 angels come. And one came to heal Abraham, because an angel, in case you didn't know, an angel can only do one thing. Not only don't they multitask, but they don't even multitask one after the other. So one came to heal Abraham, one came to tell Sarah that she was going to give birth to a child, and one came to turn over Sodom and Gomorrah. So first they asked Abraham, where is your wife Sarah? She's in the tent. And then they asked Sarah, where is Abraham, your husband? So from this we learn when you go to somebody's home, you ask after the welfare of how their husband or wife is doing. And the Kli Yakar is saying that they were angels. They knew, first of all, they knew where she was. And they had just talked to Abraham, so why would they ask Sarah where he was and what he was doing? So it says they weren't asking physically. They were coming to convey God's message that they would have a blessing. And they wanted to know, they were kind of the Yenta angels. They wanted to know, Sarah was 89 and Avram was 99. What did you do that merited that you should have such a blessing, that this miracle be done for you? And it says, Avram says Sarah's in the tent, meaning in the tent that was open on 4 sides to greet guests. And it was said that in this merit of the mitzvah of Haknasis Orachim, they merited to have a child. And it goes on in this teaching to say that a secret of fertility is to have guests. And it says that in chapter 27 of Tanya, that a righteous person, a tzaddik, is found more in this world than before in the world, the higher worlds without a body, than they were in this physical world with a body. that they're not a life of flesh and blood. They have three things. They have emunah, which is faith. They have awe of God, and they have love of God. So the angel said, you're receiving these blessings because you have this deep level of emunah, of faith and trust. You have the level of awe, and you have the level of love of God. And you serve God with true love, with unconditional love, and you do good to others, and you open your home to have guests, even though it might have been hard, and even though you were old, and maybe it was hard to churn that butter, but their home was always open to guests. So there is a story told in 1697. There was a couple. His name was Eliezer, and her name was Sarah. And they loved having guests, and they always had lots of guests in their home. And they would have the guests come on Friday afternoon, and they would keep them even till Sunday. They would serve them all the meals on Shabbos and on Saturday night. And they were poor. It wasn't that they had a lot of money, but they showered their guests. And a guest shows up on Shabbos afternoon, and they welcome them in, and the guests are upset, like they're talking not nicely, like, how could you be so nice to this new guest? You know, maybe they came in the Shabbos afternoon. Did they violate Shabbos? And then Eliezer went in the back, and he was weeping and weeping, thinking, did he do something wrong in being kind to his guests? But he knew he didn't, and he invited him to stay over and to stay until Sunday. And when he left on Sunday, he escorted this guest, because it was a custom to escort guests to make sure they got out safely, to make sure they were protected. And when he was leaving, this guest said to him, I am Eliyahu, the prophet Eliyahu Hanavi, and he said, I have come to test you. And you were kind to me. You were kind, even if it was a little suspicious, you were kind to your guests. And he said to him, I am going to grant, and this couple was childless their whole life, and he said, you're going to be blessed with a child, and you should tell him to fear no one but God himself. And this was the parents of the Baal Shem Tov that merited to have this holy soul. And he was told, he was orphaned at a young age, and his father said to him, don't fear no one but God himself. And then I learned this teaching from Rabbi Raskin, and he taught over one thing. He said, when Meir Abasara, a wonderful friend and holy teacher in the world, that when the Rebbe said, do you know why Sephardim are so connected? He said three things. He said why they keep to their traditions. He said, one, they have emunah, they have faith in their leaders. Number two, they study Zohar. And number three, their homes are always open for guests. So I want to make a l'chaim and give us all a blessing that we soon can have our homes wide open for guests. And, you know, some of us, I've come to have a few guests every week outside. Now the weather's getting colder. It's getting more challenging, but we're all going to get our fur coats on and fur hats on and enjoy the Russian weather. But we should all have the blessing that our homes be able to have those four doors open again, and that our houses be filled with tables and chairs, and that we can greet people with kindness and warmth, and that we really merit to have the real Mashiach come. And before Parshas Chayei Sarah, which is in a week, which I've been in Hebron for that Parsha for many, many years, and I'm expecting to be in Hebron for Parshas Chayei Sarah this year, so God should not make me a liar in public service organization, that we should all be in Hebron together for Parshas Chayei Sarah. And I want to wish everybody a blessed week, and really that we have to find the way to join levels of unity and love from one to the other. So fake fur, right, sir? I would never wear real fur. Fake fur coats. Okay. Or I borrow Shirley's down coat, which I'm going to do. So really, everybody, thank you for coming to the class. I so appreciate it, and I will see everybody next week. So, l'chaim.